I was looking for tax forms in my parents' filing cabinet when I found 17 life insurance policies worth $50 million that would mature on my 20th birthday. Behind them were receipts for thallium sulfate, ethylene glycol, and ricin powder, all delivered days before my worst flare-ups. I'd spent 18 years thinking I had a mysterious chronic illness, while my parents cried at my bedside, but the final receipt was dated 2 weeks from now. I accidentally found out my parents were planning to end my life. I was looking for tax forms in my parents' filing cabinet to apply for disability benefits when I found life insurance policies, each worth millions. That's when I realized my parents had been culling me since the day I was born. My parents were the picture of devoted caregivers. For 18 years, they'd driven me to countless doctor appointments, held my hand through procedures, researched treatments for my mysterious chronic illness. By the time I was 10, I couldn't run without wheezing. By 15, I needed help climbing stairs. Now at almost 18, I spent most days in bed, too exhausted to even shower without sitting down. Mom quit her job to care for me full-time, mixing special smoothies to help with my fatigue, brewing herbal teas for my pain. Dad worked overtime to pay for specialists who could never quite diagnose what was wrong. "We'll never give up on you," they'd say, tears in their eyes as I lay in another hospital bed. Our relatives praised them constantly for their sacrifice, while I felt guilty for being such a burden. Then I found the policies and realized my whole life had been not only a lie, but a murder plot. The policies were from 17 different companies, premiums that cost more than our mortgage, all maturing when I turned 20. Behind them were receipts, thallium sulfate, ethylene glycol, ricin powder, all delivered to our house days before my worst flare-ups. The final date on the policies, when they would all mature and my parents could collect if I died, was circled in red, and it was only 2 years away. I stared at the papers until they blurred, my whole life rewriting itself. Every hospital visit where they advocated for more tests, every special meal Mom prepared just for me, every supplement Dad researched. 18 years of slow, careful poisoning disguised as love. I confronted them at dinner. "I found the policies," I said, my voice shaking. "I know what you've been doing." Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Dad set down his water glass. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom smiled sadly. "Oh, sweetheart, are you having those paranoid thoughts again?" She looked at Dad with concern. "Remember what Dr. Morrison said about the delusions?" I slammed the receipts on the table. "Thallium sulfate? Ricin? What have you been using these for?" Dad sighed and picked up his phone. "I'm calling Dr. Morrison. She needs to be admitted tonight." Mom was already standing, reaching for me. "Come on, sweetie. Let's get you packed." I tried to run, but only made it 3 steps before Dad grabbed me. Years of poison had made me weak as a child. "This is for your own good," he said as Mom prepared a syringe. "You're very sick, sweetheart. These delusions are getting dangerous." The needle went in, the room spun, and I woke up in a psychiatric ward. For 3 months, I fought to save myself while they tightened the noose. Every doctor I contacted believed their story about my paranoid delusions. 18 years of medical records proved I was chronically ill and unstable. When I refused to eat, they got a court order for forced feeding. When I tried to tell other patients, the staff increased my antipsychotics. "Your parents visit every day," the nurses said. "You're so lucky to have them." They were right. My parents never missed a visit, bringing homemade meals the staff forced me to eat. "We know you're scared of the hospital food," Mom would say, spooning soup into my mouth, "but I made this just for you." Each visit left me sicker. My organs began shutting down. The doctors blamed my chronic condition and said I was entering the final stages. My parents cried beautifully, holding vigils at my bedside. "We always knew this day might come," Dad told the staff. "We just hoped for more time." Behind him, Mom was already planning my funeral. Last week, I made one final desperate attempt. I begged a janitor to test my food, but he reported me to the nurses. "She's getting worse," Mom sighed when they told her. "The paranoia is constant now." They moved me to the terminal ward, where Mom personally managed my comfort care. They hired private nurses who let Mom bring all my meals. She sat with me for hours, making sure I ate every bite. "I know you hate us right now," she whispered yesterday, stirring something into my applesauce. "But this is what your dad and I needed to do. And we took such good care of you your whole life, didn't we? You got so much attention." My organs were failing faster. The doctor said maybe a week. My parents slept in shifts at the hospital, so I was never alone, never able to refuse their loving care. "These 18 years went by so fast," Mom said one morning, injecting something into my feeding tube. "I'm going to miss taking care of you so much." She was crying real tears, and that was the worst part. They did love me, in their way, the same way they loved their house, their car, their garden. I was just another investment they'd carefully tended, and harvest time had come. They'd collect $50 million for their dying daughter while everyone praised them for their devotion. Most parents would have given up, the nurses told them. "She's lucky to have you." I lay there paralyzed by medications and poison, unable to speak while I watched them accept comfort for their impending loss, as everything started to go dark around me. The darkness wasn't death. It was just another dose of whatever Mom had mixed into my feeding tube. I woke to find her adjusting my IV, humming softly while Dad read financial documents in the corner chair. My throat burned when I tried to speak. Nothing came out except a rasp. Mom noticed my eyes were open and smiled, brushing hair from my forehead. Her touch felt like ice. "Good morning, sweetheart. You gave us quite a scare yesterday." She checked the monitors surrounding my bed. "Your heart rate dropped so low, but you're a fighter, aren't you?" Dad looked up from his papers. "Insurance forms." I could see the company logos from here. He caught me staring and quickly tucked them into his briefcase. "The doctors want to discuss end-of-life care," he said carefully. "But we told them we're not ready for that conversation." Of course they weren't ready. The policies didn't mature for another 2 weeks. They needed me alive until then, barely hanging on but still breathing when the clock struck midnight on my 20th birthday. A nurse entered to check my vitals. Young, maybe mid-20s, with tired eyes from a long shift. She frowned at the readings. "Her potassium is dangerously low again." She made notes on her tablet. "Has she been able to keep anything down?" Mom's face crumpled with practiced grief. "I've tried everything. Even her favorite soup from when she was little. She manages a few spoons before." She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes. The nurse squeezed Mom's shoulder. "You're doing everything you can. Not many parents would go to these lengths." After she left, Mom resumed her humming. She pulled out a thermos from her bag, the same one she'd used for my school lunches years ago, back when I could still walk to the bus stop without collapsing. "I made your special smoothie," she said, pouring the thick liquid into a cup. "Remember how this always helped during your bad spells?" I remembered. Every flare-up followed the same pattern. Mom's special remedies, Dad's concerned phone calls to specialists, and me getting progressively worse despite their devoted care. 18 years of data points I'd been too sick to connect. She lifted the cup to my lips. I tried to turn my head but barely managed to twitch. The paralytic substances made sure of that. They'd convinced the doctors I needed them for my own safety after my violent episodes during admission. "Don't fight it, sweetheart." Mom's voice stayed gentle as she tilted the cup. "Just a few sips." The liquid burned going down. down, metallic, with an aftertaste like cleaning fluid masked by strawberries. My stomach cramped immediately. Dad moved his chair closer, taking my limp hand in his. We've been thinking about what kind of service you'd want. Nothing too elaborate. You always hated being the center of attention. They discussed funeral arrangements like I was already gone. Mom wanted lilies. Dad preferred roses. They debated between cremation and burial while I lay there screaming silently behind unblinking eyes. The Millers asked about visiting, Mom said, wiping my chin where smoothie had dribbled. But I told them you're not up for it. Better they remember you how you were, how I was. A sick child they'd crafted through careful doses, maintaining the perfect balance between sympathy and crisis. Never quite well enough to leave home. Never quite sick enough to raise suspicions. Until now. Dr. Morrison arrived for rounds, flanked by residents. She'd been my psychiatrist during the involuntary hold, the one who'd dismissed every piece of evidence as delusion. How are we doing today? She addressed my parents, not me. They all did that now. She's peaceful, Mom said. The medications are helping with her agitation. Dr. Morrison nodded, checking my chart. Her liver enzymes are concerning. We may need to adjust the antipsychotics. Whatever you think is best, Dad said. We trust your judgment completely. They stepped into the hallway for a hushed conference. Through the open door, I caught fragments. Organ failure, days, not weeks. Comfort measures only. Mom stayed behind, stroking my arm. I know you can hear me, she whispered. I've always known when you were pretending to sleep. She was right. All those nights I'd laid still while she checked on me, measuring her doses, adjusting her poisons. I thought I was protecting myself by playing unconscious. Instead, I'd been giving her practice. Your father thinks we should increase the ricin. He's always been impatient. She sighed. But I told him we need to be careful. Why does Mom seem so calm about discussing these horrible plans right in front of her daughter? There's something really strange about how she's talking to her like they're having a normal conversation while admitting to everything. It makes me wonder if she actually believes what she's doing is somehow caring. Too fast and there might be questions. She pulled out a syringe, tapping it to remove air bubbles. This is just potassium chloride. Very traceable if anyone looks. But who's going to autopsy a chronically ill girl who's been dying for years? The needle went into my IV port. Fire raced through my veins. My heart stuttered, skipped, found its rhythm again. Mom watched the monitors, adjusting the dose like a chef perfecting a recipe. There we go. Just enough to weaken the muscle without triggering alarms. She disposed of the syringe in the sharps container. By tomorrow, maybe the day after, your heart will simply stop. Natural causes, they'll say. A tragedy, but not unexpected. Dad returned with coffee and sandwiches from the cafeteria. They ate lunch beside my bed, discussing mundane things, work gossip, neighbor drama, plans for remodeling the kitchen with the insurance money. Just another ordinary day in their extraordinary crime. We should call Aunt Helen, Mom said between bites. Let her know to prepare for travel. Already done. She's on standby for the funeral. Dad wiped mustard from his chin. Your whole family is ready to come support us through this difficult time. They'd planned everything. My death was just another item on their checklist, scheduled between grocery shopping and paying bills. 18 years of methodical preparation leading to this moment. A different nurse came for the evening shift. Older, more experienced, with sharp eyes that lingered on my parents' hovering presence. Visiting hours ended an hour ago, she said firmly. Oh, we have special permission, Mom explained, given the circumstances. The nurse checked her tablet, frowning. I don't see any notation about extended visits. Dr. Morrison approved it, Dad said. You can check with her. I will. The nurse made more notes. In the meantime, I need to perform patient care. You'll have to step outside. My parents exchanged glances but complied. As soon as the door closed, the nurse leaned close to check my pupils. Can you hear me, honey? Blink once for yes. I managed the tiniest flutter of my eyelids. She noticed. Good girl. She began her examination, thorough and professional. When she reached my IV site, she paused. Interesting. She said nothing more, but I saw her make extensive notes. When my parents returned, she was adjusting my pillows. All done, she announced. Though I notice her potassium levels are fluctuating unusually. Has she been receiving any medications I'm not aware of? Just what's on her chart, Mom said quickly. Why? Probably nothing, but I'll mention it to the doctor. The nurse left without another word. Mom watched her go, jaw tight. We should be more careful, she murmured to Dad. She's just being thorough, he replied. No one suspected anything for 18 years. Why would they start now? But I'd seen the nurse's expression, the way she'd studied my IV port, the careful notes she'd taken. For the first time since my admission, someone was actually looking at me instead of through me. That night, my parents took shifts as usual. Mom dozed in the chair while Dad read by the window. The ward was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and distant footsteps in the hall. I focused all my energy on moving, just one finger, one sign that I was still fighting. The paralytic substances made everything feel impossibly heavy, but I concentrated on my right index finger, the tiniest twitch. Nothing happened for hours. Then, as dawn light crept through the blinds, I felt it, the slightest movement, barely visible, but real. Dad was pouring coffee from his thermos when the sharp-eyed nurse returned. She checked my chart, then looked directly at me. Morning rounds in an hour, she announced. I'll need to prep her. We'll help, Mom offered, instantly awake. That won't be necessary. The nurse's tone brooked no argument. Hospital policy. She waited until they reluctantly stepped out, then immediately moved to my bedside. Her fingers found my pulse, counted silently. Your heart rate increases when they're here, she said quietly, and decreases when they leave. Interesting pattern for someone supposedly comatose. She checked my pupils again, then did something unexpected. She lifted my right hand, studying my fingers. Can you move at all? Even a little? I concentrated everything on that index finger, the tiniest twitch, but she caught it. Good. She glanced at the door. I've been reviewing your file. 18 years of mysterious illness. No definitive diagnosis. Symptoms that worsen after home visits. She leaned closer. I've seen this before. My heart monitor spiked. She noticed. Stay calm. I'm going to help you, but we need to be smart about it. She pretended to adjust my blankets while speaking. Your parents have everyone convinced you're delusional. Direct accusations won't work. We need proof. She pulled out her phone, quickly photographing something on my IV line. I found traces of injection sites that don't match your medication schedule. Someone's been adding things to your IV. The door opened. Mom peered in suspiciously. Is everything all right? Just checking her skin integrity, the nurse said smoothly. Bed sores are a concern with immobile patients. Mom relaxed slightly. Of course. We appreciate your thoroughness. The nurse finished her tasks and left. Mom immediately moved to my bedside, studying my face. You look flushed, she said. Are you running a fever? She pressed a hand to my forehead, and I wanted to scream. Every touch was a violation, a reminder of 18 years of false concern hiding calculated harm. Dad joined her. Maybe we should increase her sedatives. She seems agitated. I'll mention it to the doctor, Mom agreed. We can't have her suffering. The sharp-eyed nurse returned later that morning with a different approach. She brought a medical student with her, a young woman who seemed nervous around my parents. The nurse introduced her as Catherine, explaining she was shadowing sharing for educational purposes. Mom's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her caring facade. Dad barely glanced up from his phone where he was messaging someone about funeral arrangements. Catherine watched everything with fresh eyes. She observed how Mom insisted on adjusting my IV herself, how Dad positioned himself to block certain angles of view. The nurse directed Catherine to check my reflexes while she distracted my parents with questions about my medical history. I felt Catherine's hands on my feet, testing for responses. When she pressed certain points, I managed the faintest twitch. Her eyes widened, but she kept her expression neutral, making notes on her clipboard. The examination lasted 20 minutes. Mom grew increasingly agitated, hovering closer with each passing moment. Finally, she interrupted to say I needed rest. The nurse agreed, but mentioned they'd return for afternoon rounds. After they left, Mom paced the room while Dad made phone calls. I caught fragments of his conversation with insurance companies, confirming policy details and payout procedures. Each call made my stomach clench despite the heavy sedation. Mom prepared another smoothie, this one thicker than before. She added multiple powders from unmarked containers in her purse, stirring methodically. The smell made my eyes water even from across the room. She approached with a cup, but Dad stopped her. They huddled together, whispering urgently. I strained to hear but caught only pieces. Something about the nurse asking too many questions, about needing to accelerate their timeline. Mom nodded and returned to my bedside. She didn't try to feed me the smoothie. Instead, she injected it directly into my feeding tube, bypassing any chance I might resist or spit it out. The liquid burned as it entered my system. Within minutes, my vision blurred. My heart raced, then slowed dramatically. The monitors began alarming. Mom pressed the call button, tears already flowing. Medical staff rushed in. The sharp-eyed nurse wasn't among them. These were different people, ones who didn't question why my parents were always present, always handling my care. They adjusted medications and checked vitals while Mom sobbed about how I'd been declining all morning. Dr. Morrison arrived, gray-faced and sympathetic. She spoke to my parents about making me comfortable in my final days, about how sometimes the kindest thing was to let nature take its course. Dad nodded solemnly while Mom clutched his arm. They discussed reducing my medications, stopping the aggressive treatments that were only prolonging my suffering. Each word felt like another nail in my coffin. I tried to move, to signal my distress, but my body wouldn't respond. The meeting concluded with decisions that would hasten my death. Less monitoring, more freedom for my parents to provide comfort care, privacy for our family during this difficult time. As the afternoon wore on, I fought to stay conscious. The poison worked through my system, shutting down functions one by one. My breathing grew labored. My skin felt cold despite the warm room. Mom sat beside me reading from a photo album she'd brought, pictures of my childhood, each one now tainted by the knowledge of what they'd been doing to me. Birthday parties where I'd been too sick to eat cake. Christmas mornings I'd spent in the hospital. Family vacations cut short by mysterious flare-ups. She paused at a photo from my 10th birthday. I was pale and thin, propped up in bed with presents around me. Now I recognized the timing, just days after they'd increased my doses, right when the policies had been updated to higher amounts. Dad worked on his laptop, finalizing arrangements. I glimpsed funeral home websites, flower arrangements, memorial service templates. They were shopping for my death like planning a party. The sharp-eyed nurse returned for evening rounds, this time alone. Mom's treating that poison smoothie recipe like she's competing on a cooking show where the secret ingredient is murder, just casually mixing unmarked powders while Dad handles the death paperwork like he's filing taxes. She immediately noticed the changes in my condition. Her expression tightened as she reviewed the new orders Dr. Morrison had written. She examined me thoroughly, paying special attention to my IV sites and feeding tube. I saw her notice things others had missed. The slight discoloration around injection points. The way my symptoms didn't quite match typical organ failure patterns. When she checked my pupils, I managed to focus on her face. She saw it. The awareness behind my eyes. The desperate plea for help. She squeezed my hand gently, a silent acknowledgement. Mom watched from her chair, pretending to knit but tracking every movement. Dad had stepped out for coffee, leaving us under her surveillance. The nurse continued her examination as if nothing was unusual. She made extensive notes in my chart, far more detailed than typical evening rounds required. Mom's knitting needles clicked faster. The tension in the room grew thick. Before leaving, the nurse adjusted my pillows and leaned close. Her lips barely moved as she whispered something I couldn't quite catch. Then she was gone, leaving me with my parents and my terror. That night brought new horrors. Mom increased the frequency of her injections, no longer bothering to hide them. She worked with practiced efficiency, adding substances to every port, every line, every possible entry to my body. I felt my organs struggling, failing, fighting to keep working despite the chemical assault. My heart skipped beats, my lungs filled with fluid, my liver burned with toxins it couldn't process. Dad sat in the corner, reading insurance documents by lamplight. Occasionally, he'd glance up to check my monitors, noting each decline with satisfaction. They were so close to their goal, so close to collecting their reward for 18 years of patient poisoning. Around midnight, Catherine appeared at the door. She entered quietly, explaining she was covering night shifts for experience. Mom frowned but couldn't object without seeming suspicious. Catherine checked my vitals with shaking hands. She was new enough to be genuinely disturbed by what she saw. The numbers didn't make sense. The symptoms didn't match. Everything about my case felt wrong. She excused herself to get supplies and returned with a sharp-eyed nurse. Together, they performed another examination, this one more thorough. They documented everything with photos and detailed notes. Mom stood abruptly, demanding to know what they were doing. The nurse explained they were following standard protocols for end-of-life care. Nothing unusual, just ensuring I was comfortable. But I saw the look they exchanged, the careful way they handled evidence, the subtle collection of samples that might prove what was really happening to me. My parents grew increasingly agitated as the night wore on. They complained about the constant interruptions, about the need for privacy during their grief, about hospital policies that seemed suddenly intrusive. The nurse remained professional but firm. She had a job to do, protocols to follow, documentation to complete. She wouldn't be deterred by their protests. By dawn, something had shifted. The nurse had gathered enough irregularities to raise official concerns. She spoke quietly with other staff members, made phone calls to supervisors, set wheels in motion that my parents didn't yet realize were turning. Mom sensed the change. She became more careful with her injections, more subtle in her additions to my care. But the damage was already done. 18 years of poison had taken its toll, and my body was failing faster than even she had planned. Dad argued for moving me to hospice care, somewhere private where they could control everything, where no observant nurses would interfere with their final push to collect their payout. But the sharp-eyed nurse had other plans. She arranged for additional tests, ordered blood work that would screen for unusual substances, requested consultations with specialists who might recognize poisoning symptoms. Each move was careful, calculated to avoid alerting my parents while building a case. She couldn't accuse them directly, not without proof, not when they had 18 years of medical history supporting their devoted caregiver image. I watched this chess game play out from my prison of paralysis and pain. Every move mattered. Every decision could mean life or death. The nurse was fighting for me in ways I couldn't fight for myself. Mom tried to intercept the blood draws, claiming I was too weak for more needle sticks. The nurse insisted they were necessary for proper care. Dad attempted to cancel the specialist consultations. The nurse had already confirmed them with department heads. The battle escalated throughout the day. My parents used every manipulation, every emotional appeal, every administrative trick they knew. They cried about hospital cruelty, demanded to speak with administrators, threatened to transfer me to another facility. But the nurse had allies now. Catherine had spoken with other staff. The irregularities were too numerous to ignore. Questions were being asked that my parents couldn't easily answer. Why did my symptoms worsen specifically after their visits? Why did my blood work show traces of substances not in my prescribed medications? Why did 18 years of medical records show patterns that didn't match any known disease? Mom made a desperate move. She called Dr. Morrison, insisting I was having another psychotic episode, that I'd somehow communicated delusions to the staff, that my paranoid fantasies were infecting others. Dr. Morrison arrived within the hour, ready to increase my antipsychotics and dismiss the concerns. But the sharp-eyed nurse presented her with documentation, test results, timeline correlations, evidence that couldn't be explained away as delusion. The psychiatrist hesitated. She'd been my parents' ally for months, but faced with actual data, she couldn't ignore the implications. She ordered her own tests, started asking harder questions. My parents' carefully constructed facade began to crack. They made mistakes under pressure. Mom was caught adding something to my IV. Dad was overheard discussing insurance payouts with too much eagerness. Small things, subtle slips, but enough to shift perception. Enough to make people look closer at the devoted parents who'd sacrificed so much. The sharp-eyed nurse worked double shifts to maintain continuity of my care. She documented everything, every injection, every addition to my food, every change in my condition after my parents' ministrations. Catherine assisted her, brave despite her inexperience. Together they built a timeline that revealed the truth hiding in plain sight. 18 years of poisoning disguised as love. A slow murder funded by insurance premiums and executed with parental devotion. But knowledge wasn't enough. They needed proof that would hold up beyond reasonable doubt. They needed to catch my parents in the act with witnesses present. They needed something undeniable. The opportunity came when Mom grew impatient. My birthday was approaching, the policies would mature, but my body was fighting harder than expected, clinging to life despite everything they'd done. She prepared a final cocktail, a massive dose designed to shut down my organs within hours. She thought the night nurse was busy with other patients. She thought Catherine had gone home. She thought they were alone, but the sharp-eyed nurse had anticipated this. She'd stationed herself where she could observe without being seen. She watched Mom prepare the syringe, watched her approach my IV port, watched her begin the injection that would end my life. The nurse burst in with security and witnesses. Mom froze, syringe still in hand. Dad jumped up, scattering insurance papers across the floor. The evidence was undeniable. The crime caught in progress. What followed was chaos. Security restrained my parents while medical staff worked to counteract whatever Mom had already injected. The sharp-eyed nurse had prepared for this, having antidotes ready based on her suspicions of what they'd been using. My parents screamed about misunderstandings, about prescribed medications, about their rights as caregivers. But the syringe contents would be tested, the papers would be examined, the truth would finally come out. As they were led away, Mom looked back at me with something like regret, not for what she'd done, but for failing to finish it. Dad calculated even then, probably wondering if attempted murder would still trigger insurance payouts. The medical team worked frantically to stabilize me, to flush the poisons from my system, to undo 18 years of damage in whatever time I had left. The sharp-eyed nurse held my hand, promising they'd do everything possible. Catherine cried as she watched, overwhelmed by the realization of what she'd helped uncover. She'd entered medicine to save lives. She hadn't expected to save one from the very people who should have protected it. Hours passed in a blur of treatments and procedures. Dialysis to clean my blood, medications to support my failing organs, therapies to counteract specific toxins they'd identified. The damage was extensive, but for the first time in my life, I was receiving real medical care. The sharp-eyed nurse never left my side. She'd risked her career challenging my parents. She'd fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. She'd seen through the performance that fooled everyone else. Slowly, painfully, my body began to respond. The paralytic substances wore off first, allowing tiny movements. Then my voice returned, hoarse and weak, but mine again. Each small improvement felt like a miracle after months of decline. Word spread through the hospital about what had happened. Staff who'd praised my parents' devotion now realized they'd been enablers. Doctors who'd dismissed my claims scrambled to review their notes. Everyone wanted to understand how they'd been fooled for so long. Something feels off about how quickly that nurse picked up on everything. 18 years of doctors missing this, but she spots the pattern in one shift. The timing of Catherine showing up for experience right when things get critical seems awfully convenient too. But I understood. My parents had crafted the perfect crime, using love as a weapon and devotion as camouflage. They'd turned natural trust into a tool for murder. They'd made everyone complicit through compassion. The investigation revealed the full scope of their plan. 17 insurance policies totaling $50 million. Receipts for enough poison to kill dozens. Medical records carefully doctored to support their narrative of chronic illness. They'd started small when I was born, tiny doses that caused minor symptoms. Then they'd gradually increased, creating a pattern of mysterious illness that no doctor could solve. They'd been patient, methodical, willing to wait 20 years for their payout. The sharp-eyed nurse monitored my vitals while the medical team scrambled to counteract the final injection. My body convulsed as competing chemicals battled in my bloodstream. The nurse adjusted IV drips, calculating dosages based on the substances she'd identified in my system. Catherine stood frozen by the door, watching security escort my parents down the hallway. Through the window, I saw Mom still clutching the empty syringe, her face a mask of disbelief. Dad walked stiffly beside her, already planning his next move. The dialysis machine hummed as it filtered toxins from my blood. Each cycle brought marginal improvement. My fingers twitched involuntarily. My eyelids fluttered, small signs of life returning to a body that had been dying for 18 years. Dr. Morrison arrived within minutes, her professional composure shattered. She reviewed the evidence the nurse had compiled, cross-referencing it with my medical history. Her hands shook as she realized how thoroughly she'd been deceived. The nurse directed the team with quiet efficiency. She'd researched antidotes for the specific poisons my parents favored, chelation therapy for the heavy metals, activated charcoal for the plant-based toxins, supportive medication solutions for my failing organs. Hours passed in a blur of procedures. My consciousness flickered in and out like a faulty light bulb. Each time I surfaced, the nurse was there, checking monitors, adjusting treatments, fighting for my survival with the same determination my parents had shown trying to kill me. Catherine returned with additional staff. Word had spread through the hospital about what had happened. Nurses who'd praised my parents' devotion now volunteered for extra shifts. Doctors who'd dismissed my claims offered their expertise. The same system that had enabled my parents now worked to save me. My body fought back harder than anyone expected. Years of poisoning had damaged me extensively, but it had also built up certain resistances. My liver, scarred from processing toxins, still functioned. My heart, weakened but stubborn, maintained its rhythm. The sharp-eyed nurse never left my bedside. She'd taken personal responsibility for my care, documenting every treatment, every improvement, every setback. Her meticulous records would serve as evidence, but more importantly, they ensured continuity of care. By morning, I could move my fingers deliberately. The paralytic substances had mostly cleared my system. I squeezed the nurse's hand when she checked my reflexes, a conscious action rather than an involuntary twitch. She smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from medical staff in months. No pity, no condescension, just relief that I was fighting back. She helped me practice small movements, rebuilding connections between brain and body. Dr. Morrison returned with specialists she'd consulted, toxicologists who understood poisoning patterns, psychiatrists who recognized factitious disorder imposed on another, ethicists who grappled with how the medical system had failed me so completely. They examined me thoroughly, this time actually listening when I managed to whisper responses. My voice was barely audible, damaged from months of chemical burns and intubation, but it was mine. I could finally speak my truth. The investigation expanded as more evidence emerged. Police searched my parents' house, finding stockpiles of poisons hidden throughout. The basement contained a virtual chemistry lab where Mom had perfected her mixtures. Dad's office held detailed spreadsheets tracking my symptoms against dosages. They documented everything, confident in their plan's success. 18 years of meticulous records showing exactly how they'd slowly murdered me while playing devoted parents. Their own obsessive note-taking would convict them. Catherine visited between shifts, struggling to process what she'd witnessed. She'd entered medicine to help people, not to uncover attempted murder by parents. The sharp-eyed nurse mentored her through the trauma, showing how vigilance could save lives. My recovery proceeded in tiny increments. First, I could wiggle my toes, then bend my knees slightly. Each movement required enormous effort, but I pushed through the exhaustion. After 18 years of declining, any progress felt miraculous. The nurse created a rehabilitation plan focused on reversing the damage. Physical therapy to rebuild atrophied muscles, occupational therapy to relearn basic tasks, speech therapy to strengthen my damaged voice. Every session was agony, but it was healing agony. Hospital administrators launched an internal review, examining how my parents had manipulated the system for so long. They discovered a pattern of staff rotation that prevented anyone from seeing the full picture. My parents had specifically requested certain doctors, avoided others, and created information silos. The sharp-eyed nurse had broken that pattern by working consecutive shifts and comparing notes across departments. Her persistence revealed what fragmented care had hidden. She'd risked her career challenging my parents, and now the hospital scrambled to implement new protocols. I graduated from finger movements to gripping objects. The occupational therapist brought me a stress ball, and I squeezed it obsessively, rebuilding strength one compression at a time. My hands, which had been limp for months, slowly remembered their purpose. The police investigation uncovered financial records showing the true scope of my parents' plan. They'd taken out the first policy when Mom was pregnant, gradually adding more as I grew sicker. The premiums had consumed most of Dad's salary, but they'd considered it an investment. They'd researched extensively, learning which poisons mimicked chronic illness, which combinations wouldn't trigger standard toxicology screens, which symptoms would seem natural for a chronically ill child. They'd turned my murder into a science project. My voice grew stronger with therapy. First whispers, then hoarse words, then complete sentences. I told my story repeatedly to investigators, therapists, and medical staff. Each telling helped me process the truth of my life. The nurse arranged for me to video chat with other survivors of medical child abuse. They shared their experiences of recovery, the long journey from victim to survivor. Their stories gave me hope that healing was possible, even after 18 years of poison. Physical therapy progressed from passive movements to active participation. I could lift my arms, though they shook with effort. I could sit up with support. My body, freed from constant poisoning, began to remember how to function. The investigation revealed that my parents had practiced on pets first. Old veterinary records showed a series of mysteriously ill animals throughout my childhood. Each death had refined their techniques before they applied them to me. I took my first assisted steps 3 weeks after my parents' arrest. The physical therapist supported most of my weight, but my legs moved deliberately. 10 steps exhausted me completely, but I'd walked. After months of paralysis, those 10 steps felt like a marathon. The sharp-eyed nurse documented every milestone with the same precision she'd used to expose my parents. She created a comprehensive record of my recovery, proof that the damage could be reversed with proper care. Her notes would help other victims. Catherine graduated from her medical training with a new specialty focus on recognizing medical child abuse. She'd seen firsthand how easily it could be missed, how devoted parents could be the greatest threat. My case had changed her career trajectory. I progressed to walking with a walker, then a cane. My muscles remained weak, my coordination impaired, but I could move independently. Each step was a victory over 18 years of forced deterioration. The hospital implemented new protocols based on my case: mandatory rotation of caregivers for chronic patients, regular toxicology screening for unexplained symptoms, training for staff on recognizing medical abuse. My suffering had exposed systemic failures they scrambled to address. Speech therapy helped me regain vocal strength. I could speak clearly now, though my voice carried a permanent rasp from the damage. I practiced reading aloud, relearning the rhythm of normal conversation after months of silence. The nurse arranged for educational assessments. 18 years of illness had left gaps in my schooling, but my mind remained sharp. I began online courses, catching up on education my parents had sabotaged. Learning became another form of therapy. I moved from the ICU to a regular room, then to the rehabilitation wing. Each transfer marked progress in my recovery. The same hospital where I'd nearly died became the place where I learned to live. My aunt visited once my condition stabilized. She'd believed my parents completely, praising their devotion while I died slowly. Now she struggled to reconcile the truth with 18 years of deception. Our relationship would need its own healing. Physical therapy expanded to include occupational skills. I relearned to shower independently, to dress myself, to prepare simple meals. Tasks that had been impossible for years became find daily victories. Life lessons from a chemistry lab in the basement. When your parents treat you like a science fair project, at least they're keeping detailed notes for the prosecutors. My body remembered capabilities my parents had stolen. The criminal case proceeded while I recovered. My parents faced charges of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and child abuse. The evidence was overwhelming, but they maintained their innocence, claiming they'd only tried to help their sick child. I testified via video link, 2 weeks still for court appearances. I detailed 18 years of poisoning disguised as love. The jury saw my medical records, the poison receipts, the insurance policies. They saw parents who'd invested in their child's death. My recovery continued in small increments. I could walk short distances without assistance. I could eat solid food without fear. I could sleep without wondering if I'd wake up. Basic human experiences felt revolutionary after years of dying. The sharp-eyed nurse transitioned from caregiver to friend. She'd saved my life through observation and persistence. Now she helped me navigate recovery, teaching me to advocate for myself in a medical system that had failed me before. I started trauma therapy to process 18 years of abuse. The psychological damage ran deeper than the physical poisoning. I had to relearn trust, rebuild identity, rediscover who I was beyond being sick. Each session uncovered new layers of manipulation. The verdict came 6 months after my parents' arrest. Guilty on all charges. They received lengthy sentences that would prevent them from ever hurting me again. I watched the sentencing via live stream, seeing them in orange jumpsuits instead of concerned parent costumes. My body continued healing. I joined a gym, starting with the smallest weights, the gentlest exercises. Building strength felt like reclaiming agency. Every rep countered 18 years of forced weakness. The insurance companies sued to recover their payouts to my parents over the years. Money meant for my care had funded my attempted murder. The legal complexities would take years to resolve, but I focused on healing rather than finances. I moved into a small apartment near the hospital. Independent living felt surreal after 18 years of manufactured dependence. I cooked my own meals, managed my own medications, created routines that supported health rather than sickness. Catherine visited regularly, now a full doctor specializing in child protection. We'd both been transformed by that night when she noticed my parents' suspicious behavior. Her career would save other children from similar fates. The sharp-eyed nurse helped me apply for disability benefits, legitimate ones based on the real damage 18 years of poisoning had caused. My body would never fully recover, but I could build a life within my limitations. I enrolled in community college, studying medical coding. Understanding the healthcare system that had both failed and saved me felt important. Knowledge became another form of power, another step toward independence. My parents attempted contact from prison, sending letters proclaiming their love, their innocence, their heartbreak at my betrayal. I burned each letter unopened. They'd had 18 years to speak. I had a lifetime of healing ahead. 1 year after their arrest, I walked a full mile without resting. My body, freed from poison, had rebuilt itself in ways doctors hadn't thought possible. I'd never be athletic, but I could move through the world independently. I started volunteering at the hospital, sharing my story with medical students. They needed to understand how easily medical child abuse could hide behind parental devotion. My suffering could teach them vigilance. The sharp-eyed nurse received recognition for her role in saving my life. She deflected praise, insisting she'd simply done her job. But we both knew she'd done far more, risking everything to see what others had missed. I learned to drive, another milestone my parents had made impossible. The freedom of controlling my own movement, choosing my own destinations, felt revolutionary. Each trip was a small rebellion against 18 years of confinement. My health stabilized into a new normal. I'd always carry the effects of prolonged poisoning, but I could manage them. Regular monitoring, proper medication, and most importantly, the absence of ongoing poison allowed me to thrive within limitations. 2 years after that night when the sharp-eyed nurse caught Mom with a syringe, I stood in my apartment cooking dinner. My hands, once paralyzed, chopped vegetables. My legs, once useless, carried me around the kitchen. My voice, once silenced, hummed along to music. I thought about the 18 years stolen from me, the childhood lost to poison and lies. The anger still burned, might always burn, but I'd survived. Despite my parents' best efforts, despite $50 million worth of motivation, despite 18 years of slow murder, I lived. The sharp-eyed nurse joined me for dinner, as she did every week. We'd moved beyond patient and caregiver to something deeper. She'd seen me at my absolute worst and fought for me anyway. That bond transcended traditional relationships. We ate the meal I'd prepared, simple food that would have been impossible during my poisoning. Each bite was a choice, each swallow an act of trust in my own judgment. I'd reclaimed the basic human right to nourish myself safely. After dinner, I walked her to the door, my gait steady if not graceful. We confirmed plans for the following week. She hugged me carefully, still mindful of my physical limitations. Then she left, and I stood in my doorway, breathing fresh air, making my own choices, fully alive for the first time in my life. Thanks for letting me wander alongside you all this time. Definitely one heck of a journey we've shared. Until we meet again, subscribe for more content like this.